December seems like a long time ago. On the fourth Sunday of Advent, I preached a sermon on the word for that day, which was love. I mentioned that love is an enormous topic and that we were going to dive into it during the season of Epiphany, which begins today. For the sermon series for the next 8 weeks, I will be using the Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis's book titled Fierce Love, A Bold Path to Ferocious Courage and Rule-Breaking Kindness That Can Heal the World. It's kind of a courageous title. I'm also going to be using Bell Hook's book, All About Love. You might wonder why we would need to spend 8 weeks talking about love. There are many ways to respond to that question, but the simplest responses are these. Jesus was all about love in action. We are 100% committed to being a justice church, continuing a long legacy of seeking justice for all people. But we don't talk much about being a church committed to love. What good is justice if not motivated by love? What good is love if it doesn't lead to justice? Bell Hooks writes that love is a spiritual discipline. I would add, it's one of the most difficult of the spiritual disciplines. How many days do we get out of bed and vow to be more loving in that day? And how many of us have already gone off the rails by breakfast time, or at least by the time that we're on our way somewhere? Even if you live alone, or maybe especially if you live alone, practicing love as a spiritual discipline is not easy because it includes how you love yourself. Understanding love as a spiritual discipline is more about the how than the why. It's more about process than about content. So today I want to lay the foundation for the next 8 weeks. Bell Hooks came up with a term that is used today in different contexts that I want us to understand and consider. The term is love ethic. In her book, All About Love, she writes that love is a combination of 6 ingredients: care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. When a person, community, or even a society moves closer toward these 6 ingredients of love, they are guided by a love ethic. Committing to a love ethic calls us to look closely at the choices we make, both big and small, as well as the relationships we have with ourselves and with others and with God. What would it mean for us as individuals and as a faith community to live by a love ethic? This week has been full of images, television programs, radio programs, podcasts, interviews, and statements from all kinds of politicians from the insurrection that happened a year ago on January 6th, the day of Epiphany. In moments when I am really trying to concentrate on being compassionate, and when I think I want to try to understand and love my enemy, I can almost get to a place of empathy about feeling so strongly about something that you would be willing to break the law. What I cannot wrap my mind around or feel empathy about or understand in any way is how anyone could or would willingly terrorize or physically harm or trample or hunt another human being. What I found particularly offensive that day and in the aftermath were how many Christians were justifying the actions of the mob by saying they had the country's best interest at heart. So you can build a noose and then go looking for individuals to hang, all the while claiming it's in the best interest of the country? We've been down that road before, when white Christian people lynched black people on a regular basis. And the truth is that violence cannot be justified through Jesus. Jesus was only ever about love and about restoring people to community and to their own humanity. Even with the religious authorities to whom Jesus spoke the most harshly, his desire was simply to knock them off their thrones of power and domination so they could get back to the heart of what they were called to, which was living by an ethic of love. The story in Matthew 2 is one we read most years at this time, probably because it's an example of anti-love. Herod loved power and domination and authority, and his fear was so great that he might lose his power that he wanted to kill the newborn baby who was thought to be the new prophesied king. When the Magi told Herod about the star in the east and what it meant and asked where the baby was, Herod sent them to Bethlehem to find the baby and then report back. The Magi followed the star all the way to Bethlehem, and the story tells us when they arrived, they were filled with great joy. They found Mary and Joseph and the baby, and they gave them the gifts they had brought. Each gift had meaning, and the Magi honored Jesus with those gifts. And then we are told that they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they went home by a different route. It sounds simple and straightforward. But imagine defying a dictator like Herod. Their fear must have been palpable. And how did they know to believe the dream that one or more of them had, rather than to trust or maybe just obey the dictator? And while we admire them for their courage and their flexibility and their ability to pivot at the last minute, have we ever stopped to wonder how they felt when the news got to them of Herod's slaughter? Herod was so angry about not being able to find Jesus that he ordered all the male babies under 2 years old to be killed. Were the Magi told? Did news travel that far in those days? How would they have understood their action at that point? Did they feel responsible in some way? They weren't responsible, we know that, but did they know that? Sometimes I wonder if they lived the rest of their lives in doubt or in grief. All these years later, we hear the story and we can easily say they chose to live by a love ethic. Remember the ingredients? Care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. They cared about giving honor to the newborn King of the Jews. They were committed to finding him as they followed the star and inquired of Herod. They used their knowledge of stars and of good and evil. They took responsibility for what could happen and made a choice that put their lives in danger. They respected their own intuition and understanding, and they trusted the dream, and they trusted the newborn infant was indeed sent by God. But what the story doesn't get into, what is most confusing about living by a love ethic, is that discernment, which simply means the sifting and sorting through of all the options and information and experience available, That discernment is most important. What if they had cared most for Herod? What if they had trusted Herod? What if they were committed to Herod? They would have gone right back to him, and the newborn Jesus would have been in danger. Living by a love ethic is not as straightforward as we might think. A year ago this week was when Father Flager, the pastor of the faith community of St. Sabina for more than 40 years now, was accused of sexually abusing two black men who were brothers and who were youth at St. Sabina. In a 24-hour period, he was accused, removed from his parish, and he became a pariah to so many. Anyone who wanted to be politically correct wanted to believe the black men who were accusing him. Father Flager is white and the men are black, and there is a power dynamic as well because he is a priest and they were youth more than 30 years ago when the incident supposedly happened. And so many people claimed, you have to believe the brothers. Most of my clergy colleagues separated themselves from him and kept their distance publicly, though some of them were supportive of him privately. How does a love ethic work in a situation like this? I consider Father Flager both a friend and a mentor, and I did not believe a word of the accusations. But who am I supposed to care for and be committed to and apply my knowledge to and take responsibility for, and who gets my respect and trust? We all know that for far too long, black people have not been believed when they speak of their experiences with people. That is a fact. I am committed in my life to believing the experiences of black people. On January 8th of last year, I was asked to speak publicly at a press conference on behalf of Father Flager, and I really wrestled with that decision. What if I ended up being wrong and I spoke on behalf of a sexual abuser? In the end, after a great deal of prayer and discernment, I chose to stand by and speak up for my friend and my mentor. I made it clear to those who invited me to the press conference that I would not denounce in any way the men who made the accusations, but that I would stick to what I knew of Father Flager. Over these past 4 years, I've spent a great deal of time with him, and if someone were to ask me the question, who do you know who lives by a love ethic, my response would be Father Flager. I know he is very controversial because of some things he has said and done over the years. I would never say that everyone agrees or has to agree with me about him being a person who lives by a love ethic. I will, though, be very clear about what I have seen and experienced and known of him, and he is a pastor that I know I never will be. And I have so much to learn from him, and he is someone with whom I want to cause some good trouble. Most of you know that he was eventually declared to have been found not guilty of the charges against him, and he was reinstated to his congregation. I share this with you simply to illustrate that living by a love ethic is not simple, it's not always clear, and it is never risk-free. My guess is that many of you have difficult scenarios in your lives as well when it comes to living by a love ethic. Bell Hooks writes that we can only awaken to love if we are willing to let go of our obsession with, and I would add, our addiction to, power and domination. She writes, the underlying values of a culture and its ethics shape and inform the way we speak and act. A love ethic presupposes that everyone has the right to be free, to live fully and well. To bring a love ethic to every dimension of our lives, our society would need to embrace change. Individuals who choose to love can and do alter our lives in ways that honor the primacy of a love ethic. We do this by choosing to work with individuals we admire and respect, by committing to give our all to relationships, by embracing a global vision wherein we see our lives and our fate as intimately connected to those of everyone else on the planet. Commitment to a love ethic transforms our lives by offering us a different set of values to live by. In large and small ways, we make choices based on a belief that honesty, openness, and personal integrity need to be expressed in public and private decisions. Living by a love ethic, we learn to value loyalty and a commitment to sustained bonds over material advancement. While careers and making money remain important agendas, they never take precedence over valuing and nurturing human life and well-being. Wow, she was an amazing author and scholar and prophet. In the past couple of youngish adult gatherings that we have had, we have heard from young adults in our congregation who are working hard in their jobs, where their employers do not live by a love ethic, and instead value either money or power or domination or all three more than the people working for them. Our youngish adults want to be loyal to the job and the organization, but they are losing themselves in the midst of it all. How can young people, how can any of us, for that matter, make choices to work with people we admire and respect? It gets tricky because sometimes we admire and respect someone who ends up being caught up in the making of money or in the power structure rather than the nurture of people. What is the change we would need to embrace as individuals and as a community if we were to commit to living by a love ethic? In October, I preached a series on the police and the prison industrial complex. Living by a love ethic necessitates a complete re-examination of how this country has used prison as a way to control and once again enslave Black and brown people. How are we still too attached to power and domination? If money is power, how would we begin to understand and use our money differently? Our instinct, and in some ways our desire, is to think in big terms and big changes because we want transformation to happen. And there are so many big changes that need to be made. But what about the day-to-day changes? When I think about wanting love to be a spiritual discipline that I engage in every day, how would I have to change my thoughts and my actions and my behaviors in every day? If fear is antithetical to love, I would have to be aware of all that I am afraid of and be willing to live by love instead. If power and domination are antithetical to love, I would have to examine where I cling to or find comfort in power or domination, and then consider how to act in order that all can live freely and fully. When people commit to a love ethic, they are changed. When organizations and churches commit to a love ethic, they are changed. We will explore many more aspects of love in the coming weeks. In the midst of a new year that holds much uncertainty so far, let us together work toward living by a love ethic. Amen.